So this is just a short clip to talk a little bit about reflective writing, but I'm going to do it in a very strange roundabout way. So I'll get to reflective writing, but reflective writing is kind of our endpoint in the HSC. And so it's worth going back kind of to the beginning and talking about reading to write and talking about Mod C and what they're trying to do. Both reading to write and Mod C, and Mod C probably in particular, because they're unlike anything that the HSC has seen before. They've earned a reputation for kind of being scary, for being nebulous, for being directionless, and they've got some bad press. And I kind of want to just quickly talk to you about undoing some of that bad press. And it doesn't matter right now whether you're in year 11 or year 12, and I am speaking to both of you about this, but don't be frightened of what these modules are trying to do. They're trying to do something that's really, really cool, and your English teachers get a little bit excited when we get to reading to write and to the craft of writing, because at their heart, these are why we became, it's the reason why we became English teachers. I have stood by this idea all along, that English literature, or literature in general, stories in general, have a huge power to change the world. And I think we always need to go back to this idea of, well, why do subjects like English exist? Because yeah, sure, we do a little bit of grammar, but we don't really spend all our time in that. What we do spend our time with is looking at the world's stories. And there is no culture that I know of that hasn't told stories. We have the immense privilege of living in a country with the oldest continuing culture. And while there may not be a written tradition, there is certainly a very long oral tradition of telling stories, and certainly we see that through the very important song lines that are often the subject of revisiting now. And even one of our buildings on campus is making use of song lines as part of its architecture. So, I mean, why do we go back and look at stories? Well, stories are how we acknowledge our shared humanity. They're the way we teach lessons. They're the way we understand ourselves. Self-expression is a really important part of who we are. So when we get to things like Mod C, that's what this gets down to. And as much as I love teaching Shakespeare, as much as I love teaching novels, those writers didn't write them with the understanding that an English teacher would stand in front of you, and certainly Shakespeare had no intention of writing Othello or writing The Merchant of Venice or writing Macbeth for an English teacher to stand in front of them and read it at students and go through it line by line. He wrote those things to be performed. So I think Mod C and reading to write are actually the most organic ways that we study and explore English. So don't be afraid of them. They're really quite liberating. They take us away from that close study, which we can get bogged down in English. Really what they're interested in is craft and expression and giving us the toolkit to express ourselves. And you'll notice that a lot of the criticisms that I give of your writing when I give you feedback are all these ideas about step away from telling me things. It's the direct opposite of the mantras that I shout at you when I'm trying to teach you how to write essays, where I'm yelling at you for specificity. I'm yelling at you, or not yelling at you, strongly wording that I want you to be explicit, to find more explicit examples, to contextualize everything, to make sure that there's no areas for ambiguity. When we get to imaginative writing, that whole idea loosens up, and I want you to be less explicit. Save your explicit detail for your analytical and critical writing, and then once you start getting into the world of the imaginative, I want you to start embracing the implicit, and looking at the stylistic devices that enable you to give me explicit detail, to engage me as a reader, to give me something to work out, to take pleasure in the craft of your writing. So What is Mod C asking you to do? Well, Mod C and Reading to Write, both of these kind of bookends of your HSC journey, ask you to look at good literature. And there is this assumption that certainly there's the prescriptions by Nessa for Year 12 and completely teacher choice in Year 11, but that somebody has put in your face some good literature. And the literature that I've chosen for certainly Year 11, I've put a Nobel Award winning Nobel Prize for literature writer in front of you in Year 11. In the standard course, you've looked at one of the yardstick science fiction writers. Year 11 advanced and Year 11 standard have both looked at canonical American writers. In advance, I've put in some writers that I think will form the Australian canon later. But every text any of you have looked at in this course has won an award of some kind at some point in time. And I put all those texts in front of you, the wide range of things that we looked at, because I thought they had something to say. And again, this is the power of literature, and the great joy of something like Mod C is that we get to springboard into discussions about our views on the death penalty. That's something that springboards out of a text, and that's what good literature is designed to do, to make us think, to make us question what we do, and hopefully at the end become better people. And I think that at some point the text that I've put in front of you, even the more amusing, entertaining ones, do that. And again, it's the difference. There is a big difference in literature that's designed purely to entertain us. And don't get me wrong, there's plenty of literature on the shelves that are surrounding me right now that aren't a textbook definition of good literature. They're enjoyable literature. But what we need to establish is what's the difference between something that I laugh about, I enjoy reading by the poolside in Penang, and then leave by that table for someone else, and a text that endures, texts that were written long before I was even considered alive on the planet, texts that were read by people who've lived many years before me and still being read. This idea of an enduring quality. And I think this enduring quality of literature steps back into this idea of craft. And that's what we're looking for in Reading to Write, although it's not called the craft of writing. But there's this implicit understanding that we've read something and then we're going away and writing something. By the time we get to that bookend in Year 12, that we've read many things, and that we've formed this developing understanding of this idea of craft, and we're able to employ craft in our own writing. So if we begin with this idea of reading, and then we go through this process of writing, to then get to this process of reflection, it's this implicit understanding that along the way we have learnt something about the craft of writing, that we've understood that texts make meaning in special ways, and we understand that as writers we have an obligation to also employ these and to make meaning through the stylistic devices that we use. So again, really what I want your takeaway to be is, whether you're in Year 11 or whether you're in Year 12, that you've understood that and I call them mentor texts, that these texts that are being put in front of you had something to teach you, and that they had something to teach you explicitly about the craft of writing, that you've understood that a good piece of literature isn't just random words on a page, that there is a level of construction there. And of course that degree of construction changes across the writers, but we understand that there is a constructedness to writing, although that is a spectrum. The writers that we study, and again, it's that difference between the book that we read and laugh at and leave at a holiday destination, compared to, say, Mulan Kundera, to Zadie Smith, to Patrick White, to George Orwell. And this understanding that those writers whose work we confront in the English classroom have given us the tools and the ability to make meaning in writing, but also to make meaning implicitly rather than explicitly like we're used to in an essay. You'll know that I harp on and on and on about this idea of show, don't tell. Show me something through the craft of writing. Let the stylistic devices that you use and the plethora of stylistic devices that you can use and choose from, let them give your writing flavor. Let them give your writing cadence. Understand that good literature needs to be read out loud to get the feel of it, and I would encourage you to do that as much as possible, which of course leads to a nice discussion we can have about one of the best lessons that I learned. And this is something I didn't really start doing until I started teaching and really started writing then, was copywriting and going back to good literature, understanding that good literature is good for a reason. Good writers are good for a reason, and that there's something that they do, and that craft is something that's worthy of our time and worthy of borrowing from, letting great writers be our mentors to make great writing ourselves. And that's something that I want you to keep in mind. So with this understanding that this is what is leading us in our English journey, and this is what is taking us to our bookend of Mod C at the very end, reflection is the thing that we do last. And I think it's funny that we do so little of it, and we pretend to do it with our critical and analytical writing. We get an assessment back, we read the feedback, and it's like, oh yeah, I'll improve that and I'll do that better next time. But Mod C forces us to slow down and to reflect properly, and I think there's a privilege in being given the opportunity to do that. So again, we come with this implicit understanding that we've read great literature, that great literature has taught us something, and that we've been using it to do something. And to reflect well, you need to be well versed in this word explain. And I've made this really high-tech poster for you. Look at how high-tech that is. But this is the heart of what we're doing in reflection. I wish I'd made another sign now, but I'm not going to stop and make it. Process. I wish I made a sign for process. And if you can keep in your mind these two ideas of process and explanation, then you can reflect very well. Because what is reflection trying to do? My first advice would be to be really cautious of formulas. You will find any number of formulas and scaffolds out there. All of them are valid in their own ways, but there isn't one way to do reflection. And naturally, you've got my resources, you've got my PowerPoints, you've got my samples, you've got the sample that I've explicitly written for you on a piece of writing that we did in class. But there isn't one way to reflect. There is, of course, better ways to reflect. And so, again, if you are centering this in explanation, that's really important. For those of you who are doing extension level English, reflection looks very different. This is what reflection is in our compulsory courses. It is an explanation that we've gone away, we've read, we've come to writing ourselves, and that we've had an intention. Even if something we wrote began as free writing, which it does for many writers, free writing is a really valid part of their process. But by the time they're getting to putting something out there in the world and putting something in front of a reader, there's an understanding that they're trying to achieve something. There's something that they are trying to do. Reflection asks you to go back and look at what your intention was. What were you trying to do? What experience were you trying to create for your reader? What reaction were you trying to elicit from them? And asking you to then explain how you did that. Now, I gave you a small exercise which looked at stylistic devices in probably a far more prescriptive manner than is helpful for the creative writing process. But I want you to understand, what those stylistic devices do, what those stylistic devices contribute to your writing, that writing gets flavor and cadence and efficacy from the stylistic devices that we use. So this is what you then begin to reflect on. I was trying to create this experience, or this was my intention, and these are the stylistic devices that great writers have taught me that work to contribute to that flavor. And so your reflective writing is going to be written in the first person. It's going to use examples from your own writing, and it's going to go through and explain your process. I was trying to create this effect. I use this stylistic device because I know it has the ability to do this. This is where I've used it, and this was the effect I was trying to create. So again, you know, if you're doing that, what you're implicitly showing your marker and what you're showing the Board of Studies is that you were able to read a mentor text and then learn something from that and put that into your own writing. So again, it's going to be using examples from your writing that you've produced and understanding the stylistic features of the writing that's been put in front of you and how you've